It seems as though the people are willing, more and more every day, to have their voices heard. This is a picture of Paris. Look at that. Massive protest for Marche de Liberté. This was on November 28th. Here's an alternate view. Seems pretty newsworthy, doesn't it? But mainstream media is largely absent. Lamestream media. Before we figure out what all that hullabaloo is about, though, let's jump back to Jimmy Dore's idea. Jimmy wants the so-called progressives in Congress to force Nancy Pelosi's hand. He wants them to threaten to withhold their vote for her as Speaker unless she's willing to put Medicare for All on the floor for a vote. He hasn't received a response from AOC yet, but Tom Hartman on his show was interviewing Mark Pocan, and Mark Pocan was making all sorts of lame excuses. I think it's interesting that Tom Hartman even asked him the question. But before we give Tom any credit, we have to realize that he didn't push back against the lame answers that Pocan gave. He didn't hold his feet to the fire at all. This is the proposal that Jimmy tweeted to AOC, and she hasn't responded. Now is the time for you to use your leverage and force Pelosi to bring Medicare for All up for a vote. Withhold your vote for Speaker until Pelosi agrees to hold a vote on Medicare for All. Only 15 votes needed. Turns out it might not even need to be 15. It might even need to be fewer, depending on how COVID affects the population of Congress. This is how you can actually get results. You have the leverage. Will you use it? He said that in response to AOC saying that critics of activists don't get it, that they try to play the polite language policy game and all it does is make them easier to ignore. And Jimmy's pointing out that she's making herself easy to ignore. On Jimmy's show where he's roasting Mark Pocan, I made this comment under the video. When we have to primary progressives, in quote marks, like this asshole, Pocan, it becomes abundantly clear that there is no hope with anyone working inside the system. If we were ever going to have a Tea Party of the left, we would have needed to elect progressives with gonads. At this point, we have exactly 0 of those. But even if only 1 or 2 of them were willing to play this hardball game, it would make a big difference. Then we would be able to see who's for real and who isn't. And at this point, my conclusion is that nobody is for real.
Having the Democrats have the speakership is dangerous because we could have 1, 2, 3 people with COVID not showing up. That means our margin could be as few as 1 seat. And, the Republicans, we could make some really big mistakes.
So you shouldn't do it. So we could, that's the whole point. You're supposed to threaten her losing the speakership. And now it's really easy to do that. It could just take 1 vote. I said 15. He's right. It will maybe only take 1 vote. Just your vote, Mark. So why wouldn't you tell Nancy Pelosi, you bring this up for a vote, or I'm not voting for you, my 1 vote, and I'm going to lose you the speakership? Why wouldn't you do that? What's the difference between Nancy Pelosi denying me Medicare for All or Kevin McCarthy denying me Medicare for All?
Kevin McCarthy is the most likely Republican to become Speaker if Nancy isn't elected. The reason he won't do it, Jimmy, is because he lacks gonads. Gonads, by the way, include ovaries. Just saying. So if even 1 progressive, so-called progressive, has the gonads to do this, I will be shocked.
Because Nancy Pelosi's a right-winger. She passed Trump's entire legislative agenda, including giving him money for his border wall. She won't give anybody relief, a cash payment. She won't do anything. She's a right-winger, and you won't stand up to her. Why? Because Mark Pocan, just like Bernie Sanders, is a cuck of all cucks. This is what you're voting for? This is what people fucking tell you to vote for Democrat for? So guys like this can go represent the progressives and never, ever do anything for you and make the dumbest, gaslighting, lamest, transparent, bullshitting excuses for it when asked about it? Now I'm challenging every other YouTuber to lay into this motherfucker because you see what a bullshitter he is. Tom Hartman's not going to do it. I want you to do it. I want every other fucking YouTuber to light this motherfucker up because it's easy. Easy. He's never going to get asked this question on CNN. He's never going to get asked this question on MSNBC. He's never going to get asked this question on, some of the biggest YouTube shows.
I think his new name should be Mark Pocant.
Oh, it's Mark Pocant.
Okay there, dear viewers and listeners, you know what to do next. Go on Twitter and light this guy's ass up. Mark Pocan. Representative Mark Pocan. Hey, there he is. I'm following him. All you have to do is click on this little feather thingy and ask him whatever you want. Hey, Mark, where are your gonads? Why don't you have the intestinal fortitude to stand up to Mama Bear Pelosi? Come on. We've got leverage now. You won't have it after January. Now is the time to apply leverage. First week of January, there's a vote for speaker. Hey, you could withhold your vote. Why don't you do that, Mark? Come on, everybody. Let's let this guy know how we feel. You can also go to Howell Underground on YouTube, and you can go back a few episodes to Jimmy Dore's plan to force progressives. Click on that one, and then go underneath to the information section, show more, and there you will find all of the Twitter addresses of all the 15 or 16 if you count Pramila Jayapal. All of these people, if they all withheld their vote from Nancy Pelosi until she decided to put Medicare for All onto the floor for a vote, that would do it. We want her specifically to bring Jayapal's House Resolution 1384 to the floor for a vote. There's even a sample tweet here if you want to use it. Progressive House members, we need you to take this pledge. Tell Nancy Pelosi that you will not vote for her as Speaker until she promises in public to bring House Resolution 1384 to the floor for a vote. Are you a fighter or are you a careerist? And then you have all of the Twitter addresses above that. This is episode 528, Jimmy Dore's Plan, if you're looking for it. One of Mark Pocan's excuses is that it wouldn't pass in the House, but it would show us who voted for it, so that would be wonderful. And then he said it wouldn't pass in the Senate, but again, it would show us who voted for it. It would put everyone on record. If 70% of the country wants it and 90% of Democrats want it, it would be very helpful to know who voted for it and who didn't. And people like Mark who ran on it and didn't vote for it, that would tell us a lot now, wouldn't it? All right, now back to Paris to see what all the hullabaloo is about. Why are they protesting in huge numbers? Not just in Paris, but all over France. Turns out Macron and his party are preparing legislation that would limit people's ability to film the police. So this huge demonstration across France is about police brutality, and it's about this specific law. This law hasn't been enacted yet, and it turns out the pressure is helping. They're actually rewriting it. There are a couple of articles from World Socialist website that explain what's going on. The first is called Macron Prepares Global Security Law Banning the Filming of French Police. On Tuesday, President Emmanuel Macron's government presented its global security bill to the National Assembly. Coming after the announcement of plans for a law against separatism, ostensibly targeting Islamist groups, this bill is part of a campaign to establish a permanent state of emergency, handing draconian powers to the police. Its provisions are unprecedented. Anyone publishing images of a public event, including police agents, in a way that could harm the agent's physical or psychological well-being faces 1 year in jail and a €45,000 fine. This purely subjective criterion, which allows police to arrest anyone filming them simply by stating that they feel uncomfortable being filmed, undermines freedom of the press and any attempt to hold security forces accountable for police brutality. The law also grants police vast new powers to carry out video surveillance of the population. Access to security cameras in stores or public institutions, as well as apartment complexes, will be granted not only to national but also municipal police. Moreover, the bill authorizes police to deploy drones with facial recognition technology to overfly and monitor public protest marches. Fuck that shit. It comes, moreover, after it emerged that the government quietly slipped a provision into its law authorizing university research funding to effectively ban protests in universities. It reads, penetrating or remaining in an institution of higher education without authorization by legislative or regulatory acts or by the appropriate authorities in order to disturb the tranquility or good order of the establishment can face penalties. These include 3 years in prison and a €45,000 fine. It is evident that after years of mounting social protests in France and internationally, a turning point has been reached. After bloody repression of strikes and yellow vest protests, the Macron government was terrified by international mass protests that erupted, including in France, after the police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis this spring. Facing mounting public anger at the massive death toll from COVID-19, the ruling elite is trying to establish a police dictatorship. Unsustainable levels of social inequality and the state criminality, like that revealed by the pandemic, are everywhere undermining whatever remains of democratic forms of rule. This next part, dear viewers and listeners, may be slightly hyperbolic. In America, Trump is refusing to admit defeat in the presidential elections and launching a coup, appealing to far-right militias to try to keep him in office. I don't think that's really going to happen. In France, the government is trampling upon constitutionally protected rights, such as press freedom and the right to protest, ramming through an illegitimate law in a desperate attempt to silence opposition by creating a climate of police terror. Now, this next part they get exactly right. There is no question that this law is illegitimate and incompatible with a democratic form of government. The United Nations Human Rights Council and the French government's own human rights ombudsman have both denounced the law as violating fundamental democratic principles. The UN noted that publishing images of police is not only essential to respect the right to free information, but also legitimate in order to exercise democratic control of public institutions. Their absence could in particular prevent the documentation of potential abuses and excessive use of force by security forces during demonstrations. The UN warned that by enacting the law, France would violate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the European Convention of Human Rights. So, dear viewers and listeners, if you were watching yesterday's show, you realize that this is fascism all over the world. Only a fascist state could enact laws such as this. Before I leave this article, I'll note that it was written by Anthony Torres and Alex Lantier. I left it about halfway through, so you may want to go back and finish it. This article, also by World Socialist website, is by Will Morrow, called Hundreds of Thousands Protest Across France Against Police Violence and Macron's Police Immunity Law. Hundreds of thousands of people joined demonstrations across France on Saturday afternoon to protest police violence and oppose the Macron government's law to criminalize the filming of the police. Opposition is growing amid a series of acts of police violence over the past week. More than 100 protests were organized across every major city. The largest protest, which took place in Paris, began at Republic Square at 2 p.m. and marched to the Place de la Bastille. The government's own underestimated account claimed that 46,000 people were in Paris alone, but images and videos show that the real number was several times higher. There were more than 10,000 in Bordeaux and Lille, and thousands in Marseille, Lyon, and Toulouse. The police responded with a violent crackdown on the protests, particularly in Paris, where hundreds of riot police were deployed. This included the beating of a 24-year-old Syrian freelance photographer, Amir al-Halbi, who works with the AFP at the Place de la Bastille. Reporters Without Borders General Secretary Christophe Deloire published a tweet of al-Halbi in a hospital with his head and face bandaged on Saturday evening, stating that he had been hit in the face with a police truncheon. Gabriel César, another journalist who was with al-Halbi in a narrow street when the police attacked, said, "We were identifiable as photographers and stuck against the wall. We cried, 'Press! Press!' There were projectiles thrown from the side of the protesters. Then the police led a charge, truncheons in hand. Amir was the only photographer not wearing a helmet or armband. I lost him from my sight and then found him surrounded by people, his face covered in blood and bandages." In another video, a riot police officer can be seen pointing a beanbag gun point blank at the face of another journalist. The global security law, which was passed by the National Assembly on Monday and will go to the Senate in January, would make it an offense punishable by a €45,000 fine and 3 years in jail to publish a video showing the face of a police officer. That was the law mentioned in the previous article. In addition, it expands the powers of off-duty police to carry their firearms by requiring that they not be refused entry to any public places for carrying a weapon. The law also provides a blanket permission for the use of drones to film protesters by police, which had already been in practice. And not only are they filming them, they are using facial recognition software to do it. The mass turnout on Saturday also was triggered by anger at 2 incidents of police violence in the past week. On Monday, riot police went on a rampage at Republic Square, attacking a peaceful encampment of between 450 and 500 refugees set up to protest the lack of housing, government support, and the approval of their asylum claims. On Thursday, Loopsider published a video of a vicious police assault of black music producer Michel Teclé in his Paris recording studio. The video has now been seen more than 20 million times. In it, Teclé narrates minute by minute while watching the CCTV footage showing police attacking him for over 20 minutes, repeatedly kicking, punching, and hitting him with a truncheon on the head and face and calling him a dirty Negro. The police threw Teclé in prison for 48 hours and falsely charged him with assaulting them before being forced to drop all charges when presented with the CCTV footage. Now we know why they don't want us to photograph them. The global security law is correctly recognized as aimed at providing the police with enhanced impunity to use violence against the population. Over the past 2 years, not a single policeman was charged for the brutal crackdowns on yellow vest protests and railway strikes, during which dozens of people had their eyes shot out and hands blown off by stun grenades and beanbag bullets. On the contrary, the riot police commander whose unit fired the tear gas canister that killed the 80-year-old woman Zineb Redouane in Marseille was among the 9,000 police bestowed with medals of honor, as was the head of the unit that raided a music concert in Nantes that caused the drowning of 24-year-old Steve Canico. Facing an explosion of opposition in the population, Macron released a statement on Facebook on Friday stating that the beating of Teclé brings us shame. Macron, whose routine police violence against peaceful protests has been condemned by international human rights organizations, absurdly proclaimed his support for the right to protest and that every citizen must be able to express his convictions and demands safe from all violence and pressure. Really? 3 police involved in the beating of Teclé have been placed in temporary detention. Oh, that will turn out horribly for those police officers, I'm sure. The government has announced an internal review of the attack on the refugee encampment on Monday, including the assault of journalist Rémi Buissine by its internal police investigators, IGPN, whose role is to investigate police but inevitably clear them of all wrongdoing. On Thursday, Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin falsely claimed in an interview on the 8 p.m. France 2 Evening News that Buissine had refused to testify in the IGPN investigation, which Buissine has refuted in a tweet stating that no one had attempted to contact him. The Socialist Party, PS, the Greens, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon's unsubmissive France Party have intervened into the protest movement to channel it behind empty appeals for police reform. These parties all support the buildup of a police state against growing opposition in the working class over social inequality and backed the imposition of the 2-year state of emergency by the PS under President François Hollande. They are terrified over the possibility of an explosion of working class anger and the development of a movement of the working class against capitalism. Seems to me that might work in this country as well. Even if the comfy people don't join the protests, there are enough angry people without you assholes. That was me if you couldn't tell. Hollande published a statement on Twitter calling on Macron to withdraw the global security law, adding that there is more honor in withdrawing a law when the risk is to create incomprehension and violence. LFI deputy Adrien Catenan called on Darmanin to go in the direction of de-escalation through the removal of the Paris police prefect Didier l'Allemand, and the withdrawal of the law that is contested even in the ranks of the governing majority. Mélenchon, speaking to reporters at the protest on Saturday, said that it is time to proceed to take in hand the police and, to be more clear, to a refounding of the police. He gave no details about what such a refounding would involve, except to declare that in a democratic government the police would be guardians of the peace. Mélenchon's aim is to conceal from workers the essential historical role of the police as the direct repressive arms of the capitalist state, tasked with protecting the interest of a tiny capitalist elite that has amassed immense wealth against popular opposition from below. Macron's rapid turn to the building of an authoritarian police state is part of a turn towards dictatorship by capitalist governments around the world, from Brazil and the United States to Germany, where the fascist Alternative for Germany has been elevated to the official opposition party in the German parliament. This process is being fueled by the tremendous growth of social inequality that has been intensified by the coronavirus pandemic. The answer to this strategy of the ruling class is the building of an international revolutionary movement of the working class to overthrow capitalism and establish workers' states, expropriate the wealth of the financial elite, and reorganize the economy to meet social need. So I want to remind you, dear viewers and listeners, that Macron is terrified of the people. We need our government to be terrified of the people, and not just the Republicans, and not just the Democrats, but the so-called progressives as well. We need Mark Pocan to be terrified. Mark Pocant. If our so-called progressives in Congress are unwilling to apply the pressure needed, it's up to us. And if we look to France, we can see very clearly how to do it. And if we look to India, we can see how to do it. 250 million people in the streets across India. The times, they are a-changin'.